In this video, we'll discuss the golden ratio proportions found on Taylor Swift's face and her likely necessity for quality family life dynamics. Enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome back. So we've got Taylor Swift today for our face reading. As I've said before, if you're new to the channel, welcome, but please go watch this 5-minute crash course face reading video that I made. That will give you the buy-in to face reading. So if you have any kind of doubts about face reading or you think this might be BS, go check that out first. It gives you some terms and terminology, what face reading is and what it isn't. And if you're liking my content, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification and share this with someone who you think will find it interesting. Taylor Swift. So I'm not a fan, and I don't mean I dislike her. I just mean I don't follow Taylor Swift, but she was mentioned quite a bit in the face reading comments. People wanted me to read her. So that being said, she's got some very interesting features, and there are a couple new themes that I'm going to talk about in this video that I have not discussed in prior videos. So specifically, let's talk about her fire features. So in the context of face reading, when we see fire features, this is characterized by things that are pointy in nature. So we're looking for the tips of the eyebrows, the inner canthus of the eye, the outer canthus of the eye, like I said, the tips of the eyebrows, any feature that comes to a point, the tops of the lip right here, what they call the Cupid's bow, the pointy edges of the mouth. So again, anything pointy, and she has quite a bit of this. So when I'm looking at these photos, her mouth in particular, she's got the classic Cupid's bow right here. So sharp points here. The edges of her mouth come to a pretty sharp point. The inner canthus of her eyes come to a very sharp point. So one of the things they talk about in face reading is that when we see very sharp inner canthus, this means that a person has a way with words, and specifically can be sharp with their words. So sometimes in the context of face reading, when people see this or they read this in the text, they see this as it's a person who is cutting with their words. And I would argue the way that can also be translated is someone who has a way with words. And when we look at Taylor Swift's life, she is a singer. So someone who is able to carve into the world with their words. She holds this trait absolutely in terms of the eye. So again, some people have a sharp inner canthus. That doesn't mean they're gonna be a singer or that they're going to be a writer, but you wanna look for these markers. Face reading and looking at people's features should give you a clue. It doesn't mean it gives you a definitive fact, but it should give you a clue because form and function relate, and face reading is about pattern recognition in the big picture. So that being said, she's also got some action-oriented eyebrows. So these are also fire related. So the themes that go with the fire element classically are future, fame, and luck. So it's said that a person with a lot of fire features has the capacity to carry those themes pretty well. And what that means by, yes, we all have a future, barring that we don't die today. But what it means is that the capacity to plan for the future, the ability to look into the future with some kind of with good prospects, to be able to plan ahead. That's fire related, but then also fame, notoriety, and luck, what we call grace here in the West, which is where basically being at the right place at the right time, and then also being opportunistic and being willing to grab and start the ignition, to start the flame quickly. So all of these things, these themes are prominent in fire-featured people, and I would say, given the success that Taylor Swift has, she definitely falls in line with this. Now, what was interesting, okay, the thing that I thought was most dominant when I was looking at her face, and I noticed it right away because I look at a lot of faces all the time, was symmetry. So we're going to do a little talk here, a little chat about the golden ratio. So for those of you who don't know, we're going to talk about the golden ratio, what it means at the scientific level, okay, the rudimentary analytical level, and that is the golden ratio, also known as the golden section, the golden mean, divine proportion, or the Greek letter phi, exists when a line is divided into two parts and the longer part, A, divided by the smaller part, B, is equal to the sum of A plus B divided by A, which both equal 1.618. So now that that's clear and out of the way, for us people who are not mathematicians, and I don't know what that means. I mean, I know what it means, but when you read that, that's just like gobbledygook. So what we want to think about with the golden ratio shows up in nature. this is one of the big things about the golden ratio that's so interesting. So the golden ratio is this spiral-like pattern, and you can see it drawn. You can go online, you can look into it and read about it. But the big takeaway with the golden ratio is that we see the golden ratio show up in nature. Now, for the people that study this, there's a sizable amount of people that say when we see mathematical patterning show up in the world, this points to the fractal and mathematical nature of the universe, which means it's structured and organized and therefore intelligently designed. Now, some people will say, no, absolutely not. That's BS. It's just chaos randomly throwing order into the mix. So I don't care where you sit on the spectrum, but the golden ratio is interesting. We see it throughout history. We find it in artworks. If you want to do a deep dive into the Vitruvian Man and read about that, Da Vinci's famous drawing, you can find the golden ratio enmeshed into that. You can see it in classical art. You can see it in the wave of Kanagawa, that classical Japanese painting with the wave. You can see it there. You can see it in lots of different places. So I started thinking about this, and just kind of on a whim, I thought I'm gonna do a little deep dive into this and just poke around and see if I can find some stuff on this that might relate to her face, given it seems very symmetrical. So if you go online, they have taken the golden ratio and they've basically done that ratio and they've turned it into a human face of sorts. So they've basically taken the golden ratio, and here's that image. They have a male and female version. The golden ratio is pretty similar. You can see how these faces look relatively similar, but they also, for the male side, it looks a little more square, a little more masculine. The female side, a little bit softer. If you go to my 5-minute crash course face reading video, the thumbnail for that is the female golden ratio face. So I'm familiar with this face. I use it in my face reading content because I like the idea of divine ratios showing up in the human form. I think that's relevant, and it's a consistent theme throughout history. Artists have been looking for this. So that being said, when you pull this up and you overlay it onto Taylor Swift's face, it's pretty interesting. So I did that, and I made a little animation here, and I'm going to have this animation running while I talk about this. But when I started doing this and I overlaid this onto her face, I started to slide the scale. Okay, I took that transparent image, I put it over her face, and I started to slide the scale so you can kind of see the golden ratio show up on her face, where it's very contrasted, where the golden ratio face is a little bit lighter, and then where you can't see it at all. And then I brought it back and I just slid that scale up and down. So you can see that here, and you can see her face is damn near on point with that golden ratio. So the only thing that deviates a little bit are her eyes. Her eyes are a little bit lower set than the classical golden ratio image, but her mouth, her jaw, her chin, where her cheekbones land, her hairline, it's really close. I'd say like 90%, give or take. So that's interesting because one of the ideas that we see again throughout history, throughout art, is that the divine ratio shows up, and people, it shows up in us as well. And so the thinking is when we see this divine ratio, this intelligently designed ratio fractally repeating in life and in the universe, the thinking is that if we carry some of those proportions, there is a level of divinity that we carry. So I'm not saying that Taylor Swift has more divinity than the next person. What it means, though, is that the golden ratio is used in artwork. You can use it intentionally to overlay it onto designs to make it aesthetically pleasing. So what they've said, even in art, I was an art major, when you read about the golden ratio and these proportions, people are drawn to looking at it. There's something beautiful and symmetrical about it, and we are drawn to symmetry. So beauty, by the classical standard, someone being attractive, often relates to symmetry. So things that are beautiful, things that we want to look at, more eyes are on them. People tend to look at beautiful things for longer periods of time. And it just so happens that this follows suit in Taylor Swift's face. She is a very famous person who happens to be very talented, and she has gotten a lot of notoriety, a lot of fame, and a lot of luck, I'm sure, along the way. But it is interesting to find this golden ratio show up on her face. So you can take this face, this golden ratio face, and you can go online and you can apply it to different celebrities. And I think there's even a golden ratio score that you can do with this kind of thing. But I found it fascinating that her face is very symmetrical, and I could see it almost right away when I was looking at her. So going back to her faces, kind of back to the face reading portion of this, she has a lot of dominant elements happening in her face. So she's got a very strong jaw. That's a wood feature. So that means drive, energy, vigor. Her eyebrows are strong, but not excessively so. So she's got a kind of a balanced wood system, I would say. Now, the other thing is she has a very full earth mouth. And as I've talked about in other videos, the mouth is about pleasure seeking. It relates to the earth element. It's about house and home and being sweet and nurturing and quality food and cuddling up with your family. So she has a very full earth mouth, which means I would guess, I don't know Taylor Swift, but she's probably a person that leans into the pleasures of life, enjoys those things, things that feel good to the touch, things that smell good, things that taste good. And yes, you can argue all people like that, but there are going to be people that really like those things, and that's what we're talking about. So she has a very full earth mouth. Now, when I was looking at her face, she has a lot of fire features, but she doesn't have the joy lines yet. She's also pretty young. I think she's 34. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she's 34, 35, somewhere in there. And so these lines start to show up around this time usually, or maybe a little bit older, but that's kind of the marker for deeply ingrained fire. So it's not saying that this is unlucky by any means. She's still pretty young. She will likely develop them, and that's a good thing. We want to get these wrinkles as we get older in theory, but she does have a lot of fire, so I would like to see those carved into her face as she gets older. Now, in looking at her face, this mixture between that full earth mouth, these fire features, my guess, again, I don't know Taylor Swift, but by face reading standards, this would point to that she's probably witty, she's probably sarcastic, probably has a sense of humor, is willing and ready to laugh, but is also fundamentally sweet. And this kind of brings us to her public persona, natural face, and inner persona. These faces are highly, highly symmetrical. It's probably the most symmetrical face I've read so far. So when I'm looking at her face, I can really see just the symmetry, especially in her eyes. They're very, very symmetrical across the board. And there isn't much of a deviation across these three faces, which means congruency of personality in the external world and behind closed doors in her interpersonal terrain. However, her inner persona is more earthy. It's a little more plump, it's a little bit wider featured, and in the context of face reading, having a face that is wider on the inner persona side is seen as favorable because that means that you are more open and accessible at the interpersonal terrain. So her public persona is actually a little bit narrower, which is a little more robust and a little bit less accessible. Still a friendly looking face, but her inner persona really shows plumper features, a little bit wider, a little bit more earth, which is indicating that she's probably of house and home. My guess would be, from face reading standards, and I could be wrong, would be that she's sweet, friendly, playful, and enjoys her home life. That would be my guess. So, in any case, this is my read on Taylor Swift. If you guys have someone else you would like me to read, please let me know. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.